We are asking lawmakers to rise above and finding out how they're going to win back the faith of the American people. Senator Rob Portman is a Republican from Ohio. How are you going to do it? Are there revenues to be raised, or does the president have to move on not getting some revenue?
How did you draw the short straw and end up here in D.C.? And Becky and Andrew are hanging out.
Oh, no, they're here.
Studio.
They're here.
They're in D.C. too?
They're in D.C. too, but they're just at different. I got to come to the rotunda. I'm at the collegial senatorial place because I look like a senator.
You're very senatorial today.
Thank you. Someone said that once.
The tie's good. Okay, here's the deal. This is why my friend John Harwood is wrong. There is another way here, and it's pretty obvious, which is that Democrats would like to see relief under the sequester. Republicans would like to hold the Budget Control Act, which includes the sequester, which, by the way, we enacted into law only 2 years ago. The president signed. The only thing that's happened since then, we've gone almost $2 trillion more in debt, right? So we want to hold those budget caps at least. That's for the discretionary part of the budget. But the way to find relief under sequester, of course, is to look on the mandatory side. So we don't need to raise taxes, I hope, because this economy is incredibly weak. What we need to do is to substitute some of that sequester with mandatory changes. And look, this is something the president has talked about. In his own budget, he has $700 billion of mandatory changes, reforms. It's the obvious place that we ought to go, and it would enable us to do two things. One, to help deal with the problem in spending right now, which is that 2/3 of the budget, which is not appropriated every year, which is on autopilot, and which is growing, by the way, from 66% to 76% of the budget in the next 10 years, would actually be able to be reformed by using sequester.
So, Harwood, don't argue with me. Argue with Senator Portman. Will that satisfy the president if he's able to, if it comes from the sequester and getting some stuff back there, or is he going to insist on an additional revenue, which is really just higher taxes, John, or closing loopholes?
For a small deal, yes, I think Senator Portman is right. But I think what we're talking about is the difference between going big and doing significant cuts in Medicare, Social Security, for which the president would and Democrats would insist on some net tax revenue, or going small and doing some sequester relief and doing some sort of entitlement stuff, and it would maybe a little bit of Medicare, maybe some ag subsidies, you know, all those sorts of things. So yeah, those are the two options in front of us, but it's pretty clear that if there's no revenue, there's not going to be a big deal. And what I'd ask Senator Portman is, do you agree, Senator, with Grover, that absolutely under no circumstances, no matter the size of the deal, no revenue, even with tax reform, and if would you vote no under any circumstances and swear on the possibility of becoming vice president? That's never going to happen.
Well, John, first of all, I'm going to be on this budget conference, so I'm not in the habit of saying what I'm going to do and don't do until I go into a budget conference and try to work something out here, because we do need to deal with the mandatory spending. If we don't, the country goes bankrupt. It's that simple. Second, if you look at what the Congressional Budget Office has told us, this is the nonpartisan group that we all rely on, taxes as a percent of the economy, which is how you ought to look at it, next year will be above the historic average, in fact over 19%, and by the way continues to be way over the historic average over the next few decades. So clearly the revenue part is not the problem. The problem is the spending part, and that's something that I think everyone should acknowledge, because it's not me saying it, it's not the president saying it, it's this nonpartisan group. Finally, within this conversation, we're going to be talking about non-tax revenue as well. There's some fees, say, you know, the fees that are in the president's own budget. You mentioned the Farm Bill. There's also potential sales of government property, which I've been pushing, as you know, because we can actually bring some money into the coffers through that way. So there may be ways to get more revenue, but to do it on the tax side at a time when we continue to have this anemic growth, everybody, I think, acknowledges there's something wrong with this economy. We're not growing as we want to. The unemployment number is still over 7%, and the real number is far higher. Don't put new taxes on the economy now. Instead, do tax reform. That's what we ought to be focusing on in this conference committee. Do something that's pro-growth, that actually lowers the rates, broadens the base, doesn't cut taxes, but does provide for our businesses and our small businesses, so both the corporate side and the individual side, to be able to provide a little relief to get this economy moving again. That's what we should be doing. And I think that, in combination with substituting the sequester for some entitlement changes and also doing something as a down payment, certainly before we raise the debt again, would help to get this economy moving and would help to get the markets up and bring back prosperity that, all of us are looking to do.
Why can't we
Joe,
get your...
I think I just heard a little flexibility.
Yeah, that's not bad. But why can't we get Rob's legislation through that so we don't play around like this anymore with the shutdown? I mean, that doesn't...
Yeah, we're gonna talk more about that
Is that
today on the
you
floor.
get bipartisan support for that?
We do.
Why hasn't it been done?
I have a bipartisan co-sponsor. I think we've got 4 or 5 Democrats to support it during the budget resolution. Let me just explain it briefly, which says that when you get to the end of the fiscal year and you haven't done an appropriations bill, you just spent what you spent the last year, but after 120 days you reduce it by 1%, another 60 days, another 1%.
Makes sense.
And the notion here is to avoid crisis by crisis, management, but
Then
also
you got to deal with the debt ceiling. What should we do with that? Why throw that in there too? That it just get rid of it.
Well, no, the debt ceiling has been very effective.
Only when
over
you
the
use
years.
it to try to extract something by threatening not to raise it.
Well, it's the only thing that has worked, Joe, because it's a tough vote, because no one wants to raise the debt ceiling. Our constituents understand what it is. It's the credit card being maxed out. It's Congress not dealing with the underlying problem. If you look back over the last 30 years, the only thing that has worked to reduce spending in this place has been a debate over the debt limit.
Yeah.
Graham Rudman, the 1990 deal that
was
first George Bush did, the 1997 deal that Bill Clinton did with Newt Gingrich. The Budget Control Act is one that finally did reduce spending year to year for the first time since the 1950s.
Right. We keep
all
asking,
came out of a debt limit discussion.
and John Harwood, we keep asking whether the Republicans have now learned not to use the debt ceiling as a hostage and putting a gun to someone's head. And it is possible to learn because the president learned not to do that because he did that once when he voted not to raise the debt ceiling to try to do so. So he was able to learn, so maybe the Republicans can learn.
Well, look, when the president voted against the debt ceiling, he said that he did so because we weren't dealing with the underlying problem, the debt. And that's what we should get back to doing, is when we raise the debt ceiling, we should do something on the debt.
Again. So you guys can't do it anymore either.
Well, it's the only thing that's worked, man. I mean, we've got to figure out a way to get this spending under control. If we don't, we're not going to be able to get
Will you
this
host
economy
Andrew
moving.
when he comes to Cincinnati for the Bengals game? Do you think he'll get a rash? And Andrew, when he gets to that provincial conservative German town, do you think that, I mean, it is a very closed-minded town,
Yeah, I think he gets a brat in him and maybe one of our local brews. I think he'll be okay.
Some Buddha pole or some chain. We'll get him.
He'll get moody with the Hootie, right? You remember that?
Get moody with the
Get moody
Hootie,
with the Hootie,
an Oktoberfest, that's right.
Yeah.
All right.
Now, Andrew is